everybody. Welcome to Identifying the Elephant in the Room. We are looking at issues of sexism within the natural products industry. This is our session 3, so we make it through this one. We're halfway there. I'm Amy Summers. I'm the series director. I'm also founder and president of Pitch Publicity and INICIVOX, and I am so happy to be joined today by my co-host, Eric Schnell. And Eric, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Hey everybody, excited to be here. Amy, thanks for having me co-host with you. I luckily have spent the last quarter of a century, 26 years serving in the natural products industry as a serial entrepreneur in the natural organic food and beverage space. I'm currently the founder of BeyondBrands, which is a national consulting agency that works with lots of young startups, mission-based, passion-based, purpose-based businesses in our industry that need lots of guidance, lots of help, lots of networking. I'm also the co-chair of Naturally New York, which is a 700-member chapter right now of Naturally Network, and we're in our second year. We've got an amazing programming session for the remainder of each month of this year. So if you don't know Naturally New York, please join us. I'm also co-founder of Beyond SKU, which is a New York City-based accelerator program that focuses on young brands between 100,000 and 500,000 in sales that need to go through an accelerator and get mentorship and guidance and kind of a mini MBA along the way. And we help them scale their businesses safer, smarter, faster coming through our program. So excited to be here today. It's a great conversation to have. I feel it's one that's that everyone should be talking about, whether they realize it or not, or they're too nervous to bring it up maybe in public. So glad there's a forum today that we can all openly talk and discuss and share from our hearts. And I think everything should be on the table today.
And I want to just personally thank Eric, because if you saw my social media post that I posted on Sunday, if you're following me, I wrote a really long diary entry thanking Eric for inviting me to be on the board for Naturally New York. So if you missed that, go back and read it. But I really do appreciate it, Eric, that you asked me to be on the board. And it's pretty crazy to think about this, but I've been working in this industry for 20 years. And although my company, Pitch Publicity, has done a lot of work for nonprofits and trade organizations, no one's ever actually asked me to be on the board. So I appreciate you for seeing that in me. It's I always say it's a sign of respect when you ask someone to be on the board.
Well, thanks for acknowledging that. And, a lot's changed, from my 25 years in this industry, where I remember the early boards were, for the most part, going back to the early 90s that I knew about or was lucky enough to meet, unfortunately, we're all men. There was barely any boards back in the early days of this industry that I saw that, unless it was run by a woman in the business, boards are basically all men. And I'm really happy to see the last decade and or more, it's shifting. If I had my personal druthers, and I've said this many times publicly over the last decade plus, I believe all boards should be mandated to be 51% female leaning. And I believe that energy would be super important to have as a board prerequisite, because it does change the dynamics of a board when you have people that are more in touch with their emotions, more in touch with their empathy, and more intuitive in making decisions. So the boards that I serve on, and I'm lucky to serve on a few, are predominantly female leaning, if not mostly female. And I'm a lucky guy to be on those boards.
Yeah, and some of our panelists, previous and coming up, Heather Granado, Karen Howard, they're on a board for women in nutraceuticals, and they're always telling me like their entire board is women, and they're telling me like how fast things happen, and that all boards should just be all women 100%, but they're at 100%. So we have a little ways to go. At Naturally New York, We're not 100%, but I think we are at the 51%. But why we're talking about Naturally New York, of course, Naturally Network is a partner of our series. So Eric, I wanted you to kind of speak to that a little bit, because I know that you are a co-founder or you're on the original board for Naturally Network. What's the difference between Naturally Network and then we have all these other affiliates, and including New York, across the country? Can you tell us a little bit about that and how people can get involved with Naturally Network and why they should be getting involved?
Well, thanks for giving us a call out. But if you haven't kind of seen the news the past year or so, or haven't watched LinkedIn enough, I mean, Naturally Network, the Naturally moment is having its time right now. So, but Even though there's a lot of new chapters, especially ours in New York, which is only a year and a half old, which was the 8th chapter. There's 9 chapters in total now. Minneapolis came on a few months back. This organization has been around for over 15 years, starting in Boulder. So naturally, Boulder was a thing that, if any of us go back 15, 20 years ago in this industry, was kind of one of the first nonprofits that was built around supporting the natural products ecosystem, where, in Boulder, they had just a thriving community of brands and businesses and investors and kind of the supply chain and service providers that all come together to build the natural products industry. And so that ecosystem in Boulder, which really was, the example for the rest of us to follow, really showed us over a decade that a community-driven nonprofit, where it's really about networking at its core, with great programming, with great introductions from young brands to established brands, and really a safe place that, I think for the most part, we'd all agree that, our core goal is to support the young brands, the young founders and co-founders that are the next generation of this industry. And Boulder really shined the light that, they'd give an opportunity for, those young brands to get in front of investors they maybe never would get to talk to on a trade show floor or at a trade show booth. And so in an intimate environment, whether it's a setting in a restaurant or a venue or a function hall, all of the 9 chapters now have their own monthly programming. We're very aggressive in New York. We meet up once a month physically in the city. A lot of the other chapters do that too. And we just had our very first coming out party at the Natural Products Expo West. And if you didn't hear about it, we had 1,000 people on the Wednesday night to kick off the show. And I think that'll be a mainstay, permanent date for us going forward in the Naturally network for years to come. We also do a first night kickoff at Natural Products Expo East in Baltimore. That'll also be on the first night. So, that's one way, if you haven't met us or we're not in a chapter local to where you live, to come to see us at some of the big shows and get to network with our folks.
Yeah, and I think that Shelby threw in the chat, or Diego threw in the chat, the link to Naturally Network. You can go there and you can find an affiliate and get connected. But while we're on that topic, I just want to say that the whole goal of our Elephant in the Room series is to be action oriented. And we had a lot of takeaways from the last session. I am just going to throw them in the chat because there are so many of them. But these are some of the top takeaways that we have from the last session. I want to remind everybody that session 6, I have some panel seats open to you if you want to give us your idea. So I will say this, I've already filled one of them. So I will let you know in the chat who that is. But we already have somebody that has a great idea. I want you to be thinking like an entrepreneur. Eric and I are entrepreneurs. We can't vent and just complain about things. We have to make change. So to do that, if you don't like the way something's going, you have the power to change it. And I want this series to feel empowering to you, that you feel like you can do that. And if you feel like you have a good idea, then I want you to join me on session 6. Craig Muckle from the Council for Responsible Nutrition has already hit me up after last session. He has a spot. I've got a couple more spots to go. So I'm going to throw all this information in the chat. And then also, Eric, just because you have such expertise, I know we're going to get our panelists on here in a minute, but just to kind of heat up the elephant room here a little bit, I know you have such expertise on boards. I'm curious, when you set up Naturally New York, this is before you brought me on, I know you had some sort of incident that was not pleasant. And it kind of was on this same topic of sexism. And I'm just curious, how did you handle that? How did you handle it swiftly? Did it take a lot of time? But what do you do when you have volunteers working with you? And I mean, it's not like a company situation where you can, like, I don't know, give somebody a warning and fire them. Like, what did you have to do?
Yeah, look, I'm sure in every board, big and small, there's issues that come up. I unfortunately, have a wife that went through a scenario when she was on her first board back in 2004, where her lead investor, when she walked in the room, pinched her ass on the way to sit down. And she's the CEO of the company, present to an all-male board. Actually, there's one woman on the board. And so, I heard that story a long time ago. And I've always just been super cognizant that if I'm on a board, part of my job is to be a board member and do my job, but it's also to serve the other board members to the best of my ability. And certainly when there's women on a board, maybe not all men are just up to speed and up to date with behavioral issues. And, they may not even realize some of the stuff they're saying or doing that could be inappropriate. Obviously, touching someone, super inappropriate. But what's inappropriate is the way you speak to somebody too. And so, yeah, when we stood up the Naturally New York chapter, when we had our very first early board, which was a group of people that got together. So it wasn't necessarily a formal process. A group of us got together to say, let's do this. And we all assumed we all had board etiquette. But one of my colleagues, a woman who I dearly, dearly care about, brought up something that wasn't what he wanted to hear. And she was pretty firm about it. And he didn't want to hear it. So he called her and she had no clue what the call was going to be about. And he screamed and berated and tirade her for a good half an hour before she can get a word in. And I know her very well, so I know exactly what happened, and said some pretty rude things. And she called me kind of shaking, white as a ghost, not really understanding what she should do now. And thank God, I stand behind everybody on board, especially women. I called the chapter, Naturally Network, the head chapter chairman of the board, and said, here's the incident. I'd like to remove this person, but I want, to run it by you guys. So I'm not doing it in a vacuum. And we're going to vote with our executive team if you give us the blessing. And Naturally Network, our chairman of the board, John Grubb, heard me out and heard out the situation and said, it's your chapter. And if this is the right thing to do, we stand behind you, Eric, in that decision. So I went back and, again, trying to have some process, explain the scenario to our 6-person executive team, and everybody bought in that the right thing to do would ask this gentleman to be removed and step away from the board, but to let him know why. So yes, I did have that call with him, and he had no clue what I was going to say when I got in the call, and I explained that his behavior was completely inappropriate, and if that's the way he talks to women, there's no shot that he should ever be on any board again that we'd be involved in, and he's removed from our board effective immediately, and I wish him a good life. And he didn't really say anything other than, I get it. And I think he understood it, didn't really apologize, but he got it, because I think he realized afterwards he let his temper get the best of him, and whatever he said, he probably felt embarrassed about. So he kind of slithered away, and that was the end of it. And I've never seen that person since. And I'm happy about that. And I'm happy I stood behind the woman on my team that did not deserve to be spoken to like that.
Well, I've always known you, Eric, to move quickly. So it's nice to hear that you move swiftly on this. And I think that, when things happen
with sexism and things like that, I think you have to move swiftly. I think letting things, if you can, if there's the ability that someone in power can, I think it has to be dealt with swiftly. That's my opinion.
Right. Yeah. Even in PR and crisis communications, you can't sit on anything for a while. And the whole no comment is the worst thing to say. You have to act immediately, within the hour. So I think that it's really great that you did that. And hopefully it serves as an example too, I think, for the other board members.
I hope, and I think it did.
So we're going to get ready to get started here in about 3 minutes. So if you're just joining us, welcome to Identifying the Elephant in the Room, Critical Communication Strategies in the Face of Sexism. I'm Amy Summers. I'm the series director and also founder of Pitch Publicity and INICIVOX. And today I'm joined by Eric Schnell, who's co-hosting with me just to kind of warm up the elephant room. And he had a great story. In case you missed it, you'll have to go back and watch the replay. How he removed
I'll always tell that story if anybody wants to.
From our board, if you missed that one. But go back and watch the replay. But I also want to mention that Eric is going to be on our After the Elephant session immediately following this panel. So the After the Elephant is live on social. You don't have to be registered for it. You will just go on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook. I will be putting the links everywhere. I'll also be putting the links in the chat before we wrap up here, so you know where to go. We're not going to do that now because we don't want you to leave. But Eric will be joined later today with Mark Allen, who's the host of Late Night Health. That's the podcast that they're going to be on, along with Jasmine Dickens and Miguel Lil. And hopefully I already see Jasmine in the chat, so maybe we'll hear from them in the chat. And then we're going to get their analysis. It's like you watch a football game and you're going to get your real-time analysis afterwards. The job for Eric and Jasmine and Miguel is to have a response and a discussion about this panel. So they're not going to be talking about new stuff. They're going to be talking about what we just discussed. And I asked them to do After the Elephant to challenge the industry, to challenge you to be thinking on how we can be action-oriented. So are you excited about After the Elephant, Eric?
Rock and roll.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. I see we've got a lot of people coming into the room now, and we are very excited. Thank you, Jasmine, for putting your LinkedIn in there. Jasmine's on our After the Elephant. Definitely connect with her. She's going to be a wealth of information later. All right, so we're about 1 minute away, and we're going to just give people a little bit more time to get in the chat. Please let us know where you are watching us from, and then also just notice that we have a Q&A button at the bottom of your link there where you are with us. And if you have any questions for the panel, make sure you put your questions in the Q&A box. It's going to be easier for us to manage. If you put in the chat, our chat's been on fire lately, so we might not see your question. So make sure it goes into the Q&A and be as active as you want in the chat. This is a conversation. We are not experts. Eric and I are not expert. Nobody on this panel that's coming up is an expert. We are just humbly coming in this room to have a discussion about this. Nobody is an expert here.
And we're still learning. We're still learning from each other every day on this subject, because it's multifaceted. And all of us, especially the guys, need to learn, etiquette. And we may think we know, we figured it out, and we didn't. So I think this is amazing that you're including men today, and I encourage more men from our industry to join organizations and panels and discussions like this, whether it's in private in your own company or in public like this, or at the trade show floor, off the floor. These are the kind of discussions that need to happen more publicly, more openly, and with more support from men. So thank you, Amy, for including us.
Thank you. And let's get right to it. So welcome to Identifying the Elephant in the Room, Critical Communication Strategies in the Face of Sexism. We are examining this today in the food, beverage, and beauty sector of the natural products industry. And I'm very happy to welcome our panelists today. We're going to start with Mariam Elghani. She is the founder of Mariam's Garlic Sauce, a line of keto, sugar-free, vegan, Levantine garlic sauces inspired by her grandmother's recipe. At age 15, she worked at her parents' Mediterranean kitchen, where customers would rave about her grandmother's garlic sauce. And this inspired her to share a part of her family's food history with others, leading her to become a natural product CPG entrepreneur after graduating California State University, Sacramento. Mariam's garlic sauce is currently offered in 100+ Bay Area grocery stores. Welcome, Mariam.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, we have Ross Perkins. He's the former COO and co-owner of Mason Dixie Foods, a leader in natural frozen food and products in more than 6,000 grocery stores and 1,000 hotels nationwide. As the company's COO since 2015, he helped bring frozen biscuits, scones, sweet rolls, and sandwiches to groceries and consumers across the country. He's also written hundreds of articles in food and beverage industry for online and print publication. And his love for entrepreneurship came after working with entrepreneurs as a Peace Corps volunteer in Malawi. Welcome, Ross.
Hey, Amy, how's it going today?
Great.
Good.
All right. Well, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing one of my very favorite people in the industry, Heather K. Terry, who's the founder and CEO of GoodSAM Foods. If you haven't checked out the brand, make sure you do. On fire right now in our industry. She's also a partner at BeyondBrands, a strategic consulting agency based in New York. She's the mastermind behind the expansion of many popular clean beauty and wellness brands, and as an advisor and angel to many up-and-coming wellness products. Heather's been in the industry over 15 years. She's passionate about direct trade, regen agriculture. Her work at GoodSAM is an example of what it means to empower farmers and create alliances that support the quality of our soil, super important, and keep farms thriving for generations to come. Heather's an executive board member and founding partner of Nature New York, which I serve on, and I'm honored to serve by her side. Welcome, Heather.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Eric.
All right. Well, one of my other favorite people who's a new friend of mine this past year from our SKU community, Tauri Laws-Phillips. Welcome today. She's a partner at A167, focused on talent and opportunity initiatives to identify entrepreneurs who have talent, drive, and ideas to build great culturally relevant businesses, but lack typical resources. She's got 10 plus years experience in CPG and worked on multiple beauty startups, serving as an equity mentor and program director for this Q Accelerator program based out of Austin, Texas, where she lives. She's also the co-owner of Cold Town Theater in Austin, where she's frequently a comedy performer, writer, and diversity facilitator. And she's also a member of our Naturally Austin community. Welcome, Tauri.
Hello, hello.
And finally, I'm very honored to introduce to you our moderator today, Aleksandra Crapanzano. She's a food columnist for the Wall Street Journal, recipient of the James Beard MFK Fisher Award for Distinguished Writing, and author of the London Cookbook, Eat, Cook, LA, and Gâteau, The Surprising Simplicity of French Cakes. Winner of 2 Gourmand Awards in France. She holds an MFA in film directing from NYU, where she has taught advanced screenwriting, is a graduate of Harvard, and she consults in the food space and currently serves on the board of Naturally New York. Welcome, Aleksandra.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Eric. Amy, this has been such an incredibly well-organized event and such an important one. So I know that I am representing everyone in saying enormous thanks. And Eric, such a pleasure to have you on board. So there is so much.
Before you get started, Eric and I are gonna sneak out, but we're gonna wish you guys a really good panel. And I'm so excited about what we're gonna learn. Eric and I will see you guys in the chat.
Okay. So there is so much, and I want to dive right in. And I was thinking, the best way to think about this at first is to really look at what we think of as sexism today, how we experience it. So I want to throw a question out to Heather. Today, is sexism usually seen as a series of microaggressions or experienced in the big, impactful decisions that companies make?
Yeah, let's just go right in, Aleksandra.
Absolutely.
Ross is laughing. He's like, okay, let's go.
Going hard. We're going to start hard.
We're just going to go straight in there, like
absolutely.
Right in the middle.
Got a lot to talk about.
Look, I think micro and macro depends on, I think it depends on who you are and how you perceive things, right? It's something that seems like a microaggression to me might seem like a macro aggression to somebody else. It depends on your experience and the lens with which you're looking through the world. And I think, sometimes we don't realize, we're all human. And I love what Eric said earlier about, a lot of men in the industry in particular still don't have it down because they've been hearing all of this swirling around them, and yet they're still behaving the same way. And I'm sorry to say that it is oftentimes coming from the male part of the industry. That's just a fact, right? And we don't, I think a lot of men in particular, and maybe even some women too, I don't want to just go after the men here, but we often forget that everyone has a different experience in the world, and we're all coming to business and relationships with different baggage and different experiences that we have, right? So one person's micro is another person's macro and vice versa. And I think they exist on many, many different levels. And just because I think something is a micro doesn't mean it's not a macro in somebody else's eyes. We all have different boundaries. And so when we enter into new relationships with people, or we enter into new contracts with people or investment relationships, whatever it is, we have to be acutely aware of who we're dealing with and how we're conducting our own selves, understanding that there's another person on the other side who maybe had a really different experience, right? And I don't think that we give that enough thought in this industry, or maybe even as humans interacting with people in our day-to-day, right? So I think it still exists 100%. All of it still exists, unfortunately. But I think we have to have a little bit more sensitivity toward one another, and the fact that that we all don't move through the world at the same pace or the same in the same way.
Thank you. You know, I think it's interesting that you talk about how different people experience different things. And one of those things obviously is language. So I wanted to ask Tauri something. I want to talk about the word family, because it has become a thing to call employees or to call a company a family, right? And it is absolutely, I think, intentionally meant to be a positive, all-encompassing, inclusive term. And yet for women, you know, family often means working longer hours. It's taking on more responsibilities. It's, you know, maybe running a company and taking out the trash at the end of the day. It can really, in our minds, be everything as it has been for centuries. And so I am wondering, is in fact calling employees, calling a company a family, do you feel like that is setting women up for false expectations, too much pressure, possible disappointment?
Oh, I think that's a company's way of utilizing their internalized misogyny to make women the caretakers of everyone in the company, as well as the people that are doing the parts of their job. I would also, can I add something to my thought?
Definitely.
Micro and macro aggressions. The way that I approach that is with the idea that the micro is the intent of the action. It doesn't in any way speak to the impact of what happens. And so the micro part of it is the intent, hurt and pain, which isn't at all what speaks to how it's impacted. And I think if you kind of turn it in that way, it's always a microaggression, because most people think they're doing good, or rarely are these things sort of like with the intent of hurting someone, but that doesn't mean that its impact can be small. And when you make it systemic, its impact is huge. So I think anytime a company has policies and kind of considers their culture familial in any way, it sets people up for not being responsible for their actions, and other people's being responsible for the actions and caretaking for everyone, when in fact that probably isn't their role in any way. It really sets them up. It can set women up for a lot of extra baggage within the workplace, and a caretaker role that isn't it.
And possibly too much unwanted intimacy as well. I mean, we always talk in the movie business about how, you know, nobody ever thinks they're a villain, and I think that goes to your point. I have a question for Ross. You know, I think as for women, so many of us have either worn a wedding ring or an engagement ring, or, you know, had a fictional husband or boyfriend at times, just to kind of deflect attention. Now, I actually have come to realize that's a terrible way to approach things, because it's essentially saying, you know, the only way that I can keep a man at bay is by telling him that I'm the property of a different man, and that man might be very angry to think that somebody is on their territory. On the other hand, it's, you know, it's shorthand, it's easy, it's something, you know, I've relied on in the past. You know, I think some of us often have to kind of take that a step further and really create a kind of a backstory or a personal narrative that gives us cover, that gives us our privacy by putting something else out there. Have you any experience in this, or had to do this?
Well, yes, I have. I mean, it's a very sensitive subject, but, you know, I have, just like many people, multiple identities. I'm an entrepreneur, you know, I'm a husband, I'm also a gay man. And so, you know, in my professional life, when I'm engaging with a new vendor or a new partner, and I know that the relationship will be rather superficial and shallow, and I want to avoid perhaps an uncomfortable conversation about talking about my personal life, I'll create a heteronormative backstory in a way, just to kind of, you know, avoid some sort of awkward conversation down the road. Like, you know, for a lot of people who are others, who are minorities, who are different in some capacity, you sometimes have that burden of feeling like you're responsible for educating people all the time about your experience in the world. And, as a gay man, my experience is not monolithic, for sure. But, you want to, you do have that burden sometimes of having to impart your experience on others. So that way they're kind of aware of, what you've gone through. However, to be completely frank, you don't want to, especially in a professional space, sometimes you don't want that to derail the task at hand, or sometimes you're not in the right headspace to have that conversation. So yeah, and to do that, just like sometimes women will wear a wedding band to, mitigate having to talk about the fact that they're single or whatever. I've, as a gay man, created heteronormative backstory to avoid talking about my sexuality in a space that I might not be comfortable doing so. Yeah, and I know it's touchy because we're told to be our authentic selves 100% of the time. And so there is an element of being disingenuous, but, that's my mechanism for, operating professionally.
I don't think any of us have not at times had to turn to some mechanism. It is a way of in fact protecting one's privacy, and one shouldn't have to do it. But it's absolutely no criticism on that.
By the way, Aleksandra, they're not bulletproof. No method is bulletproof. Those of us that have worn wedding rings and have been propositioned,
and it doesn't stop it.
We're both married on both sides. It's like, that's a whole other can of worms, right? Like that has happened. And I think, we think we're protecting ourselves, but it's no matter what, if you've got the right aggressor on the opposite side, there's always a way around it, right?
Yes. And I think the tough thing is in that moment when you are engaged in a business conversation, you really, you're depending in some ways on that continuing in a positive mode, and to have to call somebody out is just, it's like it just can kill something immediately. And so of course we have to turn to something else to kind of keep that positive momentum and that sense of friendliness going, while also kind of protecting our own vulnerability. Which leads me to a question for Mariam. When somebody at work questions you about your dating life, your current relationship status, how do you avoid, or how do you respond, I should say, to avoid, further sexual advances, additional inappropriate questions, and really without being too personal or too impersonal, or being cut off, really?
Right. It's, in my experience, as others have said, even when I pretend, if I wasn't in a relationship at the time, I'll pretend I was in one, and maybe even make up a story. It doesn't work. But if I directly tell the person that I'm not interested in their advancement, they actually haven't stopped in the past. So I'll try different things. Like I'll try directly telling them I'm not interested. I'll try telling them I have a relationship. I'll try telling them I'm just not dating right now, or some other thing. I'll try everything, essentially. Unfortunately, it has not worked. I've tried a variety of things, and oftentimes it is with buyers or employees at retailers that this is happening with. So it's directly the person that's deciding whether or not I stay on the shelf, or if I'm going to be brought into the shelf or whatever. And so it leaves me in a very awkward, uncomfortable, and seemingly like dangerous situation, at least emotionally. And I have had buyers even call me when they're drunk, and these things happen. So I've had to block people and kind of go that path, unfortunately, with buyers, and hire men to kind of do some of the in-person work for me that I've wanted now to avoid entirely. So it's left me in a position right now where I felt like I had no choice but to do some cutting off, because I felt as though I had tried essentially everything and it did not stop. And so right now I'm in actually sort of a limbo state where I want to continue and have these relationships with buyers and people at the grocery stores that I work at or work with. But I'm actually very unsure of how to manage it because nothing I have done has worked at this point in time.
The power dynamic is incredible. And it's abused very often. I can't tell you how often I've mentored over 150 startups, and so often at things like trade shows have had women founders that I mentor send me their location with a text message of just in case I need you, or I'm gonna like the SOS. How often I've had those one-on-one conversations of, I know this investor is now hitting on me. He's asking for the second or third dinner. I met him through his partner, those sorts of things where it's gone beyond. And it's that skewed line of like being trailed along for what that power dynamic is, whether it's getting into an on shelves, better placement, or financial investment in exchange for sex. And it's not spoken often, but it's implied. And how long can that relationship be strung along? It happens far, far more than anyone would think.
It sounds also that it's not necessarily happening in the actual workplaces in your company as much as it's when you have to leave that domain, so that even if your company is a safe place, once you are continuing your job outside in the rest of the world, whether it's an event, whether it's a conference, showcase, a business meeting, is really where you're left most vulnerable. Would anybody care to comment on that?
I would agree that most, not all of my interactions tend to happen with follow-up with buyers or an employee at the grocery store that, stocks the shelf or, manages the inventory in some way. It tends to happen in follow-up texts where, making sure the order is in. And this is when I was still doing direct deliveries, which I'm not doing anymore intentionally so that I don't have to do any of these in-person interactions essentially, or avoid them at least 70% of the time. And it will usually result in me being hit on or being asked literally to go on vacations with them behind their wives' back essentially, or other inappropriate comments, and I'll have to turn them down and sort of like apologize in some way, like sorry or something, because I am in this weird position now where I'm like, I just got a PO for this amount of money. Now I've rejected your sexual advance. What's going to happen now with my business? So it does tend to happen, and then essentially 50% of the time the buyer goes basically cold afterwards, after I've rejected them.
Unbelievable. A question for Heather. What is the most toxic work environment you've been in? And what are some of the signs that you now know to look at and to look for right away? What would you say to somebody young starting out in the business? Not that we're all not young, we're all young, but somebody younger who is who's trying to figure out what the telltale signs are.
I mean, look, for me personally, I've historically hired primarily women in my organizations because that's something I believe in. I believe, I love having women at the table. I love having them participate in growing and catapulting a business onto the landscape. I would agree. Most of the incidents that have occurred for me in the industry, and there have been many, have happened from the outside because I construct my organizations the way I do, right? Because that's the way I do it from the internal perspective. When we talk about toxic environments, I talk about from the inside of a company and from the outside of a company. So on the inside of a company, and this is just maybe a sidebar, but I think the thing that I've seen in organizations, because of course I've started my own and I've advised a lot of other companies, primarily female-driven companies throughout the course of my career, is when silos are created in organizations. And when those silos occur, where you have sidebar conversations going on between employees that are inappropriate or are hiding something from upper management, that's always a big, big red flag for me when I start hearing about silos. And, that's something to look for internally in your company. I think in the external world, it's a lot of what Mariam's talking about, where you have those advances either on the investment side or on the buying side. I've been lucky enough to never experience that on the buying side, but certainly in the investor side or the supplier side, I've spent the majority of my career in supply chain and managing supply chains and being at the root of supply chains. When it happens there, it can be very, very complicated on the investment side and the supply side, because you are relying on those external resources for literally your product and literally your survival of a business, right? And so it's a tough road to navigate, and there's no right way to do it. You've got to shut it down, or in the old days, for me, I've been doing this for almost 15 years. This is my 15th year in the natural products industry. In those early days, there was no Me Too. This is pre-Me Too. I was in a world of pre-Me Too. There was no speaking up for women when I started in this industry. We had to grin and bear it. We had to bite our tongues. I was in a situation once in the field, and I won't name names or countries, but where a supplier of mine exposed himself to me, came into my room completely naked, propositioning me for sex because we were both married. That's a really tough situation to be in. And, pushing that person out of the room and then dealing with the implication of that on the other end. To this day, that person pretends like nothing happened between us, and he still is in the industry, right? And that was a time when men could really get away with that. They can still get away with that, by the way. It's just a little bit harder, right? But in those days, I was in my late 20s. I had just gotten married. It was terrifying. That's a really terrifying situation. And for those out there who think that this hasn't happened to women, I have a whole team of women at GoodSAM, and I'll tell you, they all have a version of that story. Being forced into a hotel room, slipped hotel room keys, which has also happened to me. All these things, these pre-Me Too movement behaviors, again, that still exist today, but now can be talked about a little bit more loosely, potentially. I say potentially because still there's a lot of women who are carrying incidents that they're ashamed of, right? Because remember, when this happens to a woman, when that aggressive behavior happens, we play back movies in our mind about because society has ingrained that in our psychology of what did I do to make that happen to me? Right. That's very ingrained in the way we grow up, in our societal behaviors, in the way that we talk about women and what it is that we do out in the world. So there's a lot of toxic behavior that still is not being accounted for, that hasn't been accounted for. But I bring that up, right, because back in the day, we had to bite our tongue. Now that I'm a lot older, right, people just kind of know not to mess with me. There's like an aura around me of like, do not mess with Heather, right? But I learned the hard way, right? I learned in a time where we couldn't speak up. Not in this industry, not anywhere, right? Because I was part of the entertainment industry for a long time too, as you know, Aleksandra. And we were never encouraged to say anything. I was out there when Harvey Weinstein was doing the things that he was doing to women in the industry and many, many other men. So I come from a little bit of a different perspective. And that's why I said at the top, we all have a different lens that we look at this through. We all have different experiences that we bring to the table. It really upsets me to hear that Mariam is still going through those types of things, that men still feel that that is an acceptable behavior in a post-Me Too movement, in a post-Me Too world. I'd like to think that men have really learned something from it. But it's deeply concerning to hear her talk about her experience that is similar to the experience that we were going through 15 years ago. So where have we evolved? And that's why it's so great that we're having this discussion, because it shows just how much maybe we are having the conversation, but the evolution isn't quite there yet.
I think it's incredibly important to have this panel for that very reason. And also when you hear these stories and you hear the amount of them and you hear them coming from everybody, which we all have, you know, you suddenly sit back and you're affected by just the sheer shock that it is happening. And that shock does, I think, lead to impact and change. We have a question from the audience, from Sean. How do we give women their power back in those situations before, during, and or after those encounters with men who are in a position to significantly impact the success of your business? Anybody want to take that on?
I commented in the chat. I think from a company standpoint, you have to be explicit in the policies that you have, so that people know what is and what isn't on the table as acceptable behavior. I think having policies that extend to your behavior within work-created relationships and within work trips, that how you are expected to act in the office extends to that time period on which you are on company business and possibly beyond, I think starts to set the tone. Ross, I saw you go like this, so I'll say, I think that meaning like your behavior online in public could have ramifications at your job. We have all seen videos of somebody do something terrible. Those show up, and then finally someone on TikTok or somewhere finds who they worked for and gets that to them. I think having policies that state that those things could be ramifications for you starts to give people pause. But I think if we start to give words to those actions and then start to really talk about, what do we do if we see something happening? How do we intervene? Who can you talk to? Telling me where and who I can speak to if I'm approached this way within my workspace or within the policies of someone I'm working with gives me options. Because if I'm working with my buyer, if I'm in a situation like Mariam, I don't know that there's options. I don't know that you even care. And so I think you have to tell me that as a supplier for your company that you care how I'm treated and how I can then escalate something if something happens. Because if I'm not your direct employee, that doesn't exist. There would be no way. Like who would I talk to, and why would they care? And would you be interested in what that feedback is? If I'm working with somebody who's the person that has the power, then goodness, what do we do? So I think, yeah, there has to be ways.
It does sound, however, like we have reached a point where there is somebody perhaps to go and talk to, where there is at least a societal or company-wide understanding of what is not appropriate and what's appropriate to an extent. It doesn't mean, however, that maybe, I mean, definitely not quite there yet, but it does seem that there is still, when doing that, this loss of professional opportunity that Mariam faced. And I wanted to ask Ross this, who's run such a huge company, is what, is there a point where when you feel that employees become less vulnerable? In other words, do you find that as people gain power, they become untouchable? Or does it kind of continue?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. Like, maybe they have a little bit more as they grow and develop professionally, they perhaps have a little bit more confidence into speaking up, and, and probably have a little bit more access to resources in order to counter unwanted sexual harassment advances. But I think it's a double-edged sword, because also as you develop professionally and grow, you're also become more of a target as well, because you're a little bit more visible, you're a little bit more out there as well. You're, engaging with a litany of partners and vendors and other, suppliers and other buyers out there. And so, you're just perhaps even more of a target the more you develop professionally. That's my take on it, but that's one man's opinion. Yeah.
No, I think it's an incredibly important one. Just another question to you, because I think as as you have been in the business for a certain amount of time, people, people do know your life. They know who you are. They know if you're married, if you're single, all sorts of things generally, especially in the world of social media, where people can generally find out quite a bit about everybody. And it makes question something, and I don't know if you've had experience with this, but I find that the desire to take selfies, right, which is seen as something that is friendly and intimate and inclusive. It's just, aren't we having a great time, and look at how amazing we are and inclusive and diverse and all of these things. Makes me pause in two different ways. One is that it actually puts people physically very close together, right? I mean, if you've got a camera, you're kind of smushed together, your hands are on each other. It is a complete crossing in my mind of a personal space, right?
Sure.
And I wonder also if you and anybody else has ever feel a little bit uncomfortable kind of being in somebody else's message, of inclusiveness in some ways, and wanting to find out how to say, happy to be with you, not necessarily sure I want to jump into this photo.
Okay, well, I'll never request a selfie with you because I don't have social media outside of LinkedIn. So I'm not one that takes selfies, but I'm sure I do get, asked by other people. So, and I do want to hear from other panelists as well on their experience, since we're all coming from different lenses. I have this experience, especially during Pride Month. Often people want to showcase LGBTQ plus people, queer people in the food space. And there's only so many of us out there. And when you get those requests, you have to understand what the intention is. I tend to not like to be promoted during Pride Month, because to me it reeks of tokenism, perhaps. I mean, I'm a queer man 365 days a year. If the intention is to promote diversity and inclusion, then that should be something that's messaged by that organization, by that company throughout the year, and not wait till the Pride Month or Women's History Month or Black History Month. Like, to me, it's just, it comes across and speaks as being disingenuous. And so that's generally yes, or to Diego's point, very performative. Absolutely. So but yeah, that's my take. But I want to hear from Mariam, from Tauri.
I've never been asked to take a photo. Like, nobody's like, I don't think I'm that popular yet, but to be honest with you, but I will say that, at Expo West, for example, or other events, like if we're taking group photos, and even before my career in the food and beverage industry, when I was working at UC Berkeley in the Department of Public Health, there were times where, like, he's basically a mentor, somebody much older, or a faculty member, or what have you, or in this industry would be like a big investor. During hugs, during photographs, they would kind of like hug you, or like suddenly their hand is like lower or higher than it should be. So I have had that happen a number of times. And it's always this like really awkward, you're moving their hand, they're not letting you move their hand. Kind of a thing, and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable, and then you're just like, okay, that happened, and now not to take photos with that person. But it's kind of like, what do you do? Like, in that moment, it's like a minute or less, and it happened, and you learn not to do it again, and that's it.
Anyone else on that?
I've had the experience that Ross has, where I know that it's sort of like the being fetishized as like, ooh, there's a Black girl. And I get both of them. I get Black and I get a girl. So it's like, oh, thanks. Or I've also been at events and had like, okay, I want to take a picture with all the pretty girls. And it's like, well, no. because I have no issue being a jerk. It's just I'm fine. I'm so happy to hop up and be the person to explain to people why not. Because I'm sort of that loud person that's happy to take it on the chin, but I'm not okay with being fetishized in that moment just because it's Black History Month, unless I'm on a stage and I'm the one making the joke. It's not your chance to touch a Black girl because it's Black History Month, and this isn't your chance to cop a feel. Just no, absolutely not, because it creates a proximity that's I'm not okay with most of the time.
Do you feel that you can deflect it with humor, or are you immediately direct on that?
I go very direct and then I soften it with humor. So I'm sort of like oh, you thought you were going to cop a feel. And then I give it an awkward pause and then go, good news. There's stuffed animals in the back, or, that kind of a thing. So, but people typically know when I'm being a jerk, and that, we both know that they were a jerk, and then I'll give them a laugh to soften it. But even then, that comes with the really quick calculation of, can I get away with this? Is this going to, does this put this, do I have the opportunity? I'm lucky enough, I've done comedy long enough that I can usually get away with saving the relationship, but it requires an incredible amount of finesse, and I've just been doing it my whole life. Most women have been dealing with how their coping mechanisms, women and men, and everyone else, the girls, the gays, and the theys, everyone has been figuring out how to deal with their coping mechanisms for their life. So I'm like, okay, I got 40 years in figuring out how to deflect sexual advances. And for most women, they've figured out how to do that as children. I watch my 8-year-old do it. And it's something that, it's something that's disgusting to think of, but we've all figured out how to do it. I do it with a combination of being curt and funny. And it's not always how I post the event. I usually feel bad that I softened it for that person. And I'm, maybe in the next 10 years, I'll learn how to just leave it at being curt and be able to walk away. But right now I don't have that opportunity. I rarely.
Sorry to interrupt. I would say you're not softening it for that person. You're actually softening it for you in a sense, because you're allowing the relationship to continue professionally. It's by necessity. I mean, there is that fine line between, are you, is your job to teach, or is it also to protect your business, to protect what you've done? And how do you, I mean, that is the constant kind of back and forth line. We have a question from the audience here from Aaliyah. Have you noticed a change since the Me Too movement? And if there has been, was it a significant change? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Ari and I are looking at each other like, because we live pre Me Too and post Me Too. So it's, I think we're, our generation, those of us that are like 40s and older, we're living in these two, we are living in what should be two different worlds. But, then hearing Mariam speak, you realize that probably a lot of what we are doing right now is that deflection is so good. And we have walls around us based on our experience that, we're not seeing it as prevalent in our immediate area as we did maybe in our 20s and 30s, right? So it's still very much there, right? And listening to a woman like Mariam right now is very jarring, right? Because I think we all hoped, those of us that are older and have been doing this for a long time, I think we all hoped that Me Too really fundamentally changed something. And I think it changed something on the external surface level, but I don't think it necessarily did anything on the internal level, the deep internal level, in the way that I think most women hoped that it would at that time. Now, I think it has paved the way for conversations like this, though, according to Amy, there's been a lot of controversy around this series, which is surprising in a post-Me Too world, right? So I think I would like to believe it has fundamentally changed something, but I think we've just scratched the surface as far as a pre-Me Too movement and a post-Me Too movement.
I agree. I think, and sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot. I think that I think what has happened is the awareness has also incited the hard shell of but I'm a good person, and that thought process of I'm a good person means that if it is not something I'm consciously doing to hurt someone, then I couldn't possibly be hurting them. Sort of going back to the idea of microaggressions is that if I wasn't pinching someone's ass, then is it really that bad? I meant it as a compliment, that sort of thing. And oh, you know, the way she was looking at me told me that none of that is appropriate, and being objectified is not okay, period. And my sexuality being a topic of conversation is not okay. All of those things are simply not okay. And that's not how you get to know me. There's so many other things you can get to know about me.
Absolutely true. Mariam?
I did want to talk about something in particular. So I did proceed with pressing charges against somebody who had assaulted me pre-Me Too, actually just 3 months before. And so that process, I ended up winning in February 2020, after losing and trying again and winning. But I was very, very clearly told by my attorney that had the Me Too movement not happened a few months after my incident, that I would not have won, period. She was very clear with me about that because she told me that the system changed, and this is in San Jose, California, that the jury changed. They were more conscious about these things. The judges were more conscious about it, and that I was one of the she told me I was the first, but I'm not sure if I never confirmed this, but I'm one of the first apparently in California to have won a case like that and had won basically reparations for it, or whatever the word is, financially. So which I get in the sum of $200 for the rest of my life every month until he dies, basically. But essentially, she confirmed with me in a legal standpoint that there was some social change and impact in a positive light, but that didn't make the process easy. It was a 4-year-long process when I had substantial evidence, and 5 witnesses, and it still took 4 years to win. And again, I did lose the first time and tried again. So that's what I have to say about that.
Good for you for trying again. You know, just going back to, if I may, your experience at Expo West, and kind of addressing that, you know, what can you tell our audience about just examples of sexism that you're seeing at work, at trade shows, that could be completely oblivious to men, or even to other women, you know, or vice versa? Because I will say there is sexism in all different aspects of life. I mean, we tend to be talking about men right now as the aggressors, but in point of fact, it does go in multiple directions. And it's also true that there are women who maybe are not noticing, or maybe are not supporting, or are of a different generation and are not putting too much credence into it. So I'm curious just to kind of have people understand what it is that matters to you that people might not actually identify as sexism.
What matters to me a lot, especially in respect to like business, going to these trade shows, anything that has to do with work, is I've worked just as hard as anyone else that's there to build a brand, any other founder or co-founder. I want to be respected and valued for the product and for the vision I have and for what I have accomplished and want to accomplish. I don't want any of my success to be credited to my oval eyes, or the shape of my face, or how cute and small my nose is, for example. Whatever, anything physical. And that has happened by men and women. I will say more by men, but it has happened with women as well, where we'll be like, oh, because of the way you look, it's easier for you. People will give you more opportunities because of the way that you look. And I understand their perspective, but at the same time, I don't agree. I think and in my perspective, in my life, it has caused a lot more roadblocks for me. So it's these little things that they're actually compliments in a way, but they're compliments that are blinding people. So they're not able to see what I've created and what I've built from nothing, and all of these successes that I've had, and I'm not taken seriously. And so I just want to go to these events like everyone else and have the experience that the men are apparently having, where they're having these successful, constructive conversations and not have any comments at all about my sexuality, who I'm dating, my physical appearance. That has not happened yet. And I really would love that to happen. We'll see.
Absolutely. Ross, question for you. Looking at kind of the role of a big company, do you feel that a company can change its culture? And does that, where does that happen? Does that happen in leadership? Does it happen with company policy? Does it happen with meetings and kind of workshops and educational outreach? How really to affect change in a company?
I mean, it comes from the top. You can put in any policies, procedures you want. You can put, whatever you want in an employee handbook. But if the leadership isn't demonstrating it, it's completely effectless. Like it's just a waste of time and a waste of effort. I absolutely believe a company and a culture can change and can change for the better. But leadership sets the tone. And if you don't have leadership enacting on it, then it's completely toothless.
Have you seen employees actually change their behavior? Have you just noticed those shifts, or do you feel it's very hard to get people to actually
I don't know if I can say from my experience, like running Mason Dixie Foods, because we had a very, we're a women-owned company. My former business partner and the CEO is a woman, so we had a very progressive environment with most of our team members being women as well. I haven't seen it personally where change needed to happen at the employee level, but I'm sure it's something that's feasible as long as leadership is behind that push.
Question for you, Heather. How do you determine kind of what line needs to be crossed before something should be reported? Right. In other words, there is this aspect of, what Heather so eloquently said, which is that, a microaggression to one person might actually feel like a microaggression, that there is this element of personal experience. We experience comments in different ways. We are able to deflect them sometimes not. At what point do you feel like something actually crosses a line into something that needs to be addressed by the top?
I mean, look, I think, unfortunately, in my experience in both the entertainment industry and the food industry, being in a pre-Me Too time, no aggression felt reportable, right? That just to me was not an option if I wanted to continue with my career and to be unscathed, right? That was, at the time, in looking at it. So, it's so funny for those of you that know me from my days at Nibmore, my business partner, Jennifer Love, she is a beautiful woman, very comfortable in her sexuality, very hit on all the time, had so many incidents. I can't even count them. I wouldn't even be able to recount the number of times things happened to her, or that investors took her to dinner 85 times because they were trying to date her versus, give us capital. We never felt that was an option for us, ever, not once. We never felt it was an option when we were mistreated, in the case that Eric talked about with the board earlier, where somebody would be screaming at us. I had, investors who told me you remind me of my wife and hung up on me, and, really crazy, crazy shit. I mean, like, so insane when you look back on it. But at that time, even the instance where somebody tried to force himself on me, it was not something that I felt I could go and say anything about at all. I, in fact, felt a lot of shame around that incident for many years. I didn't tell my husband for many years. I didn't tell, the only person that knew was my business partner at the time. And that, and I think what men need to understand, or what anybody in that position, when you're in that instance and you're the person on the other side coming at somebody like another woman, or at somebody who doesn't want that advance, is that you literally change the course of their life, whether it's reported or not, for the rest of their life. And that's powerful stuff, and yeah, even a comment like that, like, you remind me of my wife. I'm like, well, first of all, I'm sorry for your relationship, but okay. But now I can look back on it and kind of be like, okay, I have a little hindsight, but in that moment, it never occurred to me to ever report it. Now I have a daughter. I have a 9-year-old daughter whom I hope never has to go through that, and whom I hope a world changes for, right? Tauri has a daughter of a similar age, right? Where we have to really be teaching these girls that it's okay to speak up and it's okay to say something. So no, I unfortunately never felt that. And again, because I'm of a little bit of an older generation, I have put up a lot of walls around me in some of those instances to ward off that experience. I think I give off an aura of, pushing it out, where, you don't have to deal with it so much when you get to a certain stage in your career, because, the more, also remember, like, the more higher profile a woman becomes, the less those aggressors will try to come in, because they know that you have real power and sway in a space, right? So I also believe that because I've entered a different phase of my career, those advances have largely stopped. Not to say that there isn't like the worst one is, I still get this one that I'm going to point out, which is, you should really smile. I want to like murder people when they say that to me. I'm like, oh my God, are you really still saying this shit to me? Would you say this to my white male counterpart? You would not. Please shut up, right? Like, please do not say those words. It's so belittling. It's so inappropriate on so many levels, right? And so I still get those undercutting kinds of pieces, the overt, like, forcefulness. Fortunately for me, I think just because of where I am in my career, that has largely stopped, right? So I think it's sad, and I applaud Mariam for, going out there and reporting it. I never had the courage to do that, but I'm also of a different time, I'm of a different time where we just really did not. And women who did report it back then, I mean, sometimes their careers could be completely destroyed, completely derailed, not to mention the emotional turmoil that came with that at that time.
I would say looking at the generation of teenagers right now, it does seem like we are actually raising, or at least many of us are raising kids who are very, very sensitive to this, whether they're boys, girls. And it does give me hope. I feel like the change is probably in another generation from ours, but I am wondering then what people imagine things will be like in 5 years. If you have a feeling of positivity, if you feel like you have this kind of seen how slow change is, that you're not thinking 5 years is that significant, or if in fact you're seeing that change is happening so quickly that 5 years actually is a real amount of time to affect change.
I think change is obviously on the horizon. That's why, without being real clear what my political proclivities are, you can go ahead and assume I'm real liberal. I'm a Black girl in Austin, Texas. I'm liberal AF. I think when you see so much happening on a political level that's attempting to hold people back, that's how, to me, I think you know that people are changing. And I think we do have hope because lots of people have tuned in for this conversation and that people are happy to have this conversation. I think that's what gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I think if I can just add to Tauri's answer, look, I think it's really encouraging right now I feel grateful to be invited into this conversation because now that I am a bit older, I think when I was younger, I would have died for a woman older than me to speak up and say something and empower me as a young woman to say something. I have a lot of empathy for the older generation of women who preceded me in their now 50s and 60s. They went through things that are unimaginable for me. Even as bad as I have gone through, or any of us has gone through, some of these women went through things that were absolutely unimaginable in the landscape, trying to move through business in those generations. So understanding and having empathy for that, I think, is one thing, but I would have died for a woman to be talking about this when I was younger, right? So I think it's really encouraging to have women like Amy really putting things like this together so that we can share our experiences and also educate, right? And really continue to advocate for what the future will be. Because if we don't have these conversations, we can't have the future that we want. Unfortunately, right? It doesn't just, a movement doesn't happen and things change overnight. So I'm hopeful for 5 years, Aleksandra. I'm hopeful.
Good. And I'm getting, speaking of Amy, I'm getting a little note saying that we have to wrap up. I could talk about this with all of you for many more hours. And I want to thank everybody who's been on the panel, and I want to thank the audience. And also just a word to the audience. So be sure to fill out the survey on the panel today. There's a chance to win a $25 Amazon gift certificate. The link to the survey is on the event platform of this session. And definitely please join the series next Thursday, also at 1 to 2 Eastern time, that is, as we examine the topic of sexism in the legal, financial, and marketing and retail sectors of the natural products industry. So, and right now, for a live discussion and response to this panel, head over to LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and watch After the Elephant session with Mark of Late Night Health. And you can also find the links to that in the chat room. So a huge thanks to everybody for attending. A special thank you to our mentor panelists for participating. And we will see you next week with a new lineup.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.